The following is a paid program, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent the opinions of the management of this station or Pamel Broadcasting. And the views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, and callers of this program are solely their own. They do not represent or reflect the views, policies, or official position of ACA, its affiliates, or its staff. ACA does not endorse any statements made during this broadcast. This is 1 in 31 Autism Today, a presentation from Anderson Center for Autism. 1 in 31 Autism Today is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 31 Autism Today, the podcast on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer with Anderson Foundation for Autism. And this is, again, 1 in 31 Autism Today, brought to you by Anderson Center for Autism. And today I'm with a longtime family member, Chip Vincie. Chip, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Good morning. It's lovely to talk to you, Eliza, and to everybody else out there.
Great. Look, we go back a long ways. You've been a part of the Anderson community for quite a long time by way of your brother, who you're gonna hopefully share some insight into that experience, what it's been like for you. But just to give our listeners a sense, Chip, I feel like you're a person who, well, you're helping us with this series on sibling perspectives, and we're going to get into some of the specifics when it comes to becoming a guardian of your sibling, which a lot of other siblings, even maybe younger siblings, might be looking at in a few years or even longer than that. But for siblings of individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities and other challenges, guardianship can I think start off sounding very far away, and then can feel more real. And with that reality probably comes lots of questions. So I'm hoping that today you can help shed light on just some ways that you approach that and some advice that you might have for others who might be in a similar position. But outside of that, you've just, as a member of the Anderson community, you've been an outspoken member of Anderson Family Partners. You've been always a person who I think asks great questions and values the support that family members can provide to each other, especially when a loved one is living in a residential program of like Anderson, but really of any kind. So I just wanted to give our listeners a sense of who you are, and how long has Tommy, your brother, how long has he been with Anderson? Do you have that number off the top of your head?
I don't have the exact date, but he came to Anderson in 1981. He was 8 going on 9, I think. And that was the Anderson. He was in the children's residential program and then moved through several cottages there. After he went into a sort of, I guess, experimental-ish program that was set up for adults before IRAs, called the Farm. It was like a brief-lived.
You said this was way before my time. I don't remember a farm, but
this was. Intriguing. I mean, it was called the Farm, but it wasn't really a farm. It was just that the house was set on an old farm.
Okay.
It had been a part of a farm.
Nice.
And it was for older folks. I don't know if you remember Kenny, Spike. They were both at the farm. Okay. So it was for kids who were aging out of the kids program. And there was really, at that time, like IRAs were still a relatively new concept. This was in the early 90s. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of adult there wasn't a clear pathway to adult services. And then
which has improved, but just as well as I do that it hasn't been resolved. Quite a number of adults who are still living on children's campuses waiting for adult placements, and there just aren't enough. I want to just stop you and go back to one quick thing, because I did the math real quick while you were talking. So if he came in 81, Tommy's been with Anderson for 45 years.
That's right. Yeah, for most of his life at this point. Yeah,
amazing. And he's still, very much a part of our community as an adult, and one of the adults that's been with us the longest. We have when you start an adult program, that within that time period, we're the first adults in Anderson's adult program, the Farm, as you called it. Many of them are still with us. So So it's kind of interesting, and it's been, for some of the longtime staff, it's been quite a I think, an experience just living alongside the adults, which is different than the children's program, which is sort of time limited. You know, you're coming to the children's program and you're graduating from the children's program. The adult program is really meant to be lifelong, for at least as long as possible in terms of safety and health and, you know, maybe medical issues. But so I think that we're very lucky to have a number of Anderson staff who have been pretty long timers and worked with Tommy and his peers for quite a long time. And again, I always want to thank you for your recognition of those staff. You're one of those people who steps out and says things, you know, in recognition of the work that people do. But let's go. So let me ask you to go back to, you know, if Tommy started at Anderson when he was 8 or 9, do you remember at what point in your life it became clear, whether it was directly said to you or it just became clear that you were going to eventually assume the role of his guardian at a certain point in your life and his life?
My mother and I talked about it right around the time Tommy became an adult. My mother there were a couple of false starts in starting the guardianship paperwork. Some of that had to do with just family stuff that would take too long to get into. Nothing terrible. I mean, you know, whatever. But and some of it was just like it really takes a lot of time, I think, is the main thing. You have to amass a lot of documentation. That was a period in my mom's life where she was moving a lot, you know, transitioning careers. She was dealing with some medical issues herself. So like it took a while, but eventually, when she applied for guardianship, she needed to name a standby guardian in case something happened to her, in case she passed away, or in the event of her passing. And so I was the logical choice. I'm the only other living relative who's this close. You know, we have a couple of distant extended family members, but that's it. Okay. And I think I was 26 when the guardianship, so 1996, so when the guardianship paperwork finally, the whole mechanism finally got started in earnest. Actually, no, I'm so sorry. 1999, so I was 28. But I knew that this was coming, you know, from, I guess, my early 20s onward. You know, sooner or later, you know, my mom would pass away, and then I would have to start making decisions. I should say, you know, like I'm very ambivalent about guardianship. I don't think it should be seen as like the go-to for folks with autism necessarily. There are lots of folks who can live independently, and, you know, it's important that people have as much autonomy as they possibly can. So like, yes. Nothing would make me happier if Tommy could communicate to me that he's like okay with living independently and he doesn't need me to be his guardian anymore. Like that, I would actually be very happy about that. But I think just given where he's at right now in his life, that I still need to be there to make certain decisions for him, or, you know, in conjunction with him, I guess is the best way to look at it. You know, sure. You're not trying to take over somebody's life. You're there to like help them do things that they can't do for themselves, or they need assistance with. I think that's a great point.
I think that's a really great point, Chip, and one worth kind of spending another minute on before we move to the next topic. Just because I don't think that's talked about as often as maybe it should be. That guardianship for a lot of people could have a meaning that really isn't. It can mean different things for different people. It's designed as it's a legal process, right? Thus the mass amounts of paperwork and documentation that's required and time. So maybe anybody listening who's kind of got questions about this, one thing to take away for sure is leave yourself plenty of time to start learning about it if you think that this might be something that you're going to need to set up for a loved one in the future. It does take time, just like anything else that requires you know, legal input, and also is kind of has a governmental type of implication of any kind. So there's that piece. But also, I love what you just said, that it's it's meant to be a safeguard, really.
Right.
For those situations where, in this case, your brother, but for really anybody who might be entering into a guardianship relationship with somebody, where it's really designed to make decisions that individual is unable to make, whether permanently or temporarily, for themselves. So sometimes those are going to be, financial decisions or medical decisions or living situation decisions. But it really, probably the healthiest way to look at it is it's not meant to be a way to make every decision. There should always be the first approach, really ideally, is to help and support that individual to make their own decisions as much as possible. And then this is kind of the safety net, right?
Yeah. It gives you an enormous amount of power over somebody else. And that's something that no one should take lightly, especially an adult. And one of the things I applaud disability rights movement for is insisting on autonomy. Whereas if you go back a generation when they had none or had it taken away from them, a lot of really terrible things, happen and still happen. So, I always feel like that's the big caveat there. But in a lot of cases, and certainly in my brother's case, there are things that he, as of right now, it needs help with. So that's where I can come in. And also there may be a situation in the future where he needs some help with advanced, with aging issues. And that's something that I can help him with as well. So, that's where I kind of approach that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're going to take a quick break though. When we come back, we'll just get right back into the conversation about kind of the approach and then some of the maybe other things for somebody that from your experience you might be able to lend some advice or some perspective to from your experience, and also what it means. I'm curious. I'm hoping we can get a little bit into how, as your sibling, which is different than being a guardian because those are two separate roles, and then you're also interacting with staff at Anderson and have been for a long time, first as a younger person and now as an adult guardian. So I want to get into all those nuances and how do you kind of make them click, and we'll do that when we come right back. This is 1 in 31 Autism Today, your weekly podcast on all things related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and we'll be right back.
Today alone, 5,370 people in the United States will be diagnosed with cancer. That's why Stand Up to Cancer funds and develops the newest and most promising cancer treatments. Stand Up to Cancer wants to provide you with every opportunity to join in this mission. By donating your home, land, or commercial property, you can help Stand Up to Cancer fund innovative cancer research. Stand Up to Cancer makes the process easy, and it may be tax deductible. Visit standuptocancer.org/giveproperty to learn more.
I'm Angela Bassett. As a first responder on screen, I know what it means to act fast in an emergency. In real life, the same urgency can save lives, especially when it comes to food allergy. For 33 million Americans, one bite can cause a life-threatening reaction. Now, there's a needle-free option, a new way to carry epinephrine. Know the risk, know the options. Be ready to act. Learn more at foodallergy.org/ready-to-act.
And now, 1 in 31 Autism Today continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs presentation from the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 31, the Autism Today. This is the podcast related to autism spectrum disorder, and I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer with Anderson Foundation for Autism, and Anderson Foundation for Autism and Anderson Center for Autism proudly sponsor and support and host this podcast. Today I'm talking with Chip Vincie, who is a longtime member of the Anderson community as the brother of one of our longtime residents in our adult program. And Chip and I are just kind of launching off this series where we're going to be obtaining the perspectives of a lot of different siblings at different stages in their lives. Chip, you were willing to talk to us about becoming Tommy's guardian, what that process was kind of like. And so far, we've really covered the fact that it's slow. It involves a lot of, I think you said, an amassing of paperwork and documentation. But then, and that's kind of the process. And then there's the reality of what does it mean to you to be your adult brother's guardian. And I thought that part got really interesting in terms of it could potentially give you tremendous control. It does give you the opportunity for control and power. So how do you, when you're coming to visit Tommy or you're checking in with the staff, because I know you do that, or you're talking to other Anderson families, do you feel like you lead with one of those roles? Do you lead with guardian, let me get that stuff out of the way? Or do you lead with brother, checking in on brother?
Yeah, I just lead with brother, checking in on brother. The only time I really think about the guardianship stuff is when I have something to sign. I need to sign. It hasn't come up that I need to challenge some kind of decision that you guys are making, or that Tri-County Care is Medicaid, is a Medicaid services provider is making, or somebody else's or medical provider is making. If that happens, then I would probably slip into guardianship mode, I guess. But 99% of the time, I don't really think about it much.
Okay.
So,
which is kind of that was kind of what you were saying in terms of people listening. That's an important differentiation. Just because you have the opportunity to have a lot of power and control doesn't mean that you should use it, especially when it's not needed, because the other role you have is to be an advocate and a supporter of your brother and making as many decisions on his own or in conjunction with the staff that work with him on a daily basis, and in that way. To me, again, that sounds like a really healthy approach and probably something helpful maybe for somebody who knows that this is coming at some point in their life, because it's important to think about how you would do both. I know your mom's no longer with us, but did she talk to you? Did you guys have conversations, or if you're comfortable talking about it in terms of, some of the things that she wanted or were hoping you would continue to do after her passing, that you still think about today and kind of live with you as you stay connected to Tommy?
Yeah. We did talk. Not so much in the last couple of years of her passing. She had a lot of medical issues, and those ended up kind of becoming more what we talked about. But before that, we had a lot of discussions about what her hopes for Tommy were. And I think in some ways it was easier for me than for her. Tommy's always just been Tommy's been Tommy as long as, I've known him. I'm only 2 years older than him, so he's been around for most of my life. I think if you're a parent, I think you may, and you have a child with a developmental disability, you may feel, partly because it's so difficult to get services, and partly because I don't think any parent sets out to be a parent of a disabled child. Not saying that and that's no judgment on parents or children. No, it's just that, I think that they have a different perspective on it, than a sibling. To me, I don't really think about Tommy as, he's just he's just my brother, Right.
You were two when he was born, right? So
yeah. So, I don't have the same maybe expectations that my mother had.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, we did talk about what she, what role she hoped I would step into. Mostly that was just being an advocate for him when he needed it, and just paying attention and keeping up regular contact with him. Yeah. There was a period in my life when I was very just swamped with my own stuff, where I was not so great about keeping in touch with him. And so I've tried to get better at that as I've gotten older. I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it does. This is just a conversation. I think I think I thought about reaching out to you for this particular topic because you have when I hear you talk anyway, especially when you're participating in Anderson Family Partners meetings and talking with other parents, all of whom have different, every individual is different. So the commonality with Anderson Family Partners families is that they're all raising and loving somebody, at Anderson, typically with profoundly affected by autism, but every individual is still different and every family dynamic is different. And some people have much younger children who are teenagers or even younger. And I'm going to be talking to some of them about what it's been like for them growing up and going through high school and living that part of their life, with their sibling who's now here at Anderson. But for you, I just figured you would do what you're doing, which is to kind of, personalize this process that can be cumbersome and overwhelming in terms of paperwork and red tape and what does this all mean? And do I have to hire a lawyer? And what am I signing off on?
Yes.
And how many things am I reading? How many behavior plans am I reading in a given month? And what if something really scary happens? Then is it all on me? Like, I think that it's valuable to talk about something that one can potentially get lost in the seriousness of it. But what I was hoping you do, again, you're doing it, is kind of reminding us all that the most important thing is still sort of having that relationship with your loved one and continuing that family dynamic. And, life gets busy and you can't always do that in the same way that you can on, certain other years of your life. But I think that through line is really important. So this is exactly what I was hoping we could talk about, is just, not just the guardianship aspect, but just how you maintain the relationship and don't forget that you're both still people and you're both brothers, even though there's all these, he's living in a group home and there's staff who work with him every day. And you have this other role that's more of sort of, many people would think a parental role, but then somebody becomes guardian after the parent passes. So it's I would just ask, I guess we have a couple more minutes, just if there's any, as you're thinking back on this, because now you're talking about it, so it's probably bringing up memories and things like that. Is there any advice that you would give anybody that we haven't already talked about, or any or even advice to a parent who might be wondering, how do I talk to my kind of teenage or early 20s child about the fact that I'm hoping they will agree to be the guardian, for our other child? That's probably got to be an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, so basic advice would be keep your paperwork organized. So in the case of the guardianship, in the case of me moving from standby guardian to guardian, I had to fill out a form. It's called 17A form, and a separate form that is an affidavit saying I am who I am and I'm stepping into this role. I had to provide medical affidavits, which meant scheduling Tommy for an appointment to reconfirm the diagnosis. It's ridiculous. My mother's death certificate. I had also by that time been divorced and remarried. My spouse, my current spouse, stepped into the role of standby guardian in case something happens to me. So I had to also provide the divorce paperwork for prior spouse.
Deep, right? Stuff that you wouldn't typically think they need to see.
Yeah. So just, and then you just have to be patient. Their surrogates court is really small. Definitely hire a lawyer.
Okay.
Just because I think it can help you make sure that the person can make sure that you filled everything out correctly. And then check in with the court and with the attorney periodically, because it can take a while. And then usually the social worker from the court will visit your sibling and also you to interview you guys, because they want to make sure that you're the right person for this role.
Sure.
They don't want to just sign on the dotted line, and eventually there'll be a court date where you appear before a judge. And in our case, it took so long that the pandemic started, and we had to do it over Zoom. But and I mean, the good thing is now I think they're doing that more, so it may actually speed things up. In terms of how to talk to your kid, I think it's tough. I think maybe it helped because I was older.
Yeah.
I was already, a grown up, and I'd seen some things in life by the time I reached adulthood. So I don't think my mother had a lot of worries about, upsetting me too much. I think if you're a younger if you're a younger sibling to the individual, then maybe you should wait a little bit. Maybe not hit them with that when they're 12. But I think the other thing is maybe I mean, it's hard. I think the one thing that's tough is to ask somebody who's like 18, are you really ready for this? Because it's a commitment.
Yeah.
They may not actually feel like they're ready for it. And I think that's okay. You know what I mean? Like I don't think, you should hold too much judgment. I mean, you also have to evaluate, is the relationship good? I mean, my relationship with Tommy was mostly good but there were some rough patches there when we were both teenagers. We kind of hated each other. I mean, loved each other, but we hated each other. So like, that's also a factor. Do you think your kid is, will grow into the responsibility? And then, I don't have kids, so I'm probably a terrible person to talk to for parental advice.
No.
That's just
I think what you shared was great, and I think the last thing you said also was really important. It is very important to think about all the sort of paperwork, documentation stuff, and keeping track of that, and the organizational and the time frames and hiring a lawyer, but also that sense of, are you ready, and is the relationship good? But that also, and I'll just close with this, kind of connects where we've been the whole conversation, which is the interplay between guardianship and also just having a positive sibling relationship and keeping that family dynamic going. So it is interrelated, and I think that's a really important thing that came out of our conversation today. We have to stop, but Chip, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing, your experience with us, and it's really good to see your face, if only on Zoom. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks.
Thanks. This is 1 in 31 Autism Today, and I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. And remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 31 Autism Today, a weekly presentation from Anderson Center for Autism. Join them for another edition of the show next weekend.